Detective Inspector Morrison and Sergeant Chun arrived at the building housing Meridian Consulting just as their surveillance team reported movement on the third floor. The woman who had met with Webb the previous day was inside the office, and she appeared to be gathering documents and equipment. She's been in there for about 10 minutes, Constable Williams reported over the radio. We can see her through the windows moving around what looks like a back office. Morrison made a quick decision. Chun, take the back exit. I'll go through the front. Let's make sure she doesn't slip away. As they entered the building, Morrison felt the familiar tension that came with potentially dangerous arrests. They still didn't know how many people were involved in Webb's operation or how desperate they might be to avoid capture. The elevator seemed to take forever to reach the third floor. When the doors opened, Morrison could hear voices coming from the Meridian Consulting office. He approached the door quietly and listened. Everything needs to be destroyed, a woman's voice said urgently. The operation is compromised. Marcus was supposed to be more careful. A man's voice replied. We can't just disappear overnight, Victoria. We have other commitments to consider. Morrison recognized this as a critical moment. They were clearly discussing the aftermath of Webb's arrest, and it sounded like they were preparing to destroy evidence. He knocked firmly on the door. Metropolitan Police. Please open the door. The voices inside went silent. After a long pause, footsteps approached the door. Can I help you? It was the nervous receptionist from yesterday. We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with the Marcus Webb investigation, Morrison announced loudly, hoping Chin could hear him from her position at the back of the building. The receptionist fumbled with the lock, clearly buying time for the people in the back office. Morrison could hear rapid movement and the sound of papers being shuffled. When the door finally opened, the receptionist tried to block the doorway. I'll need to see some identification. Morrison showed his badge and, gently but firmly, moved past her. Where is Victoria Harrison? The receptionist's face went pale at the mention of the name. I don't know what you're talking about. Morrison walked through the small reception area toward the back office. Through the partly open door, he could see a woman in her 40s feeding documents into a paper shredder. A man was hurriedly packing electronic equipment into boxes. Victoria Harrison, I'm Detective Inspector Morrison, Metropolitan Police. I need you to step away from the shredder and keep your hands where I can see them. The woman looked up with a mixture of anger and fear. She was well-dressed and professional-looking, but her carefully composed appearance couldn't hide the panic in her eyes. This is a private office. You have no right to be here. Actually, we do, Morrison replied, showing the search warrant. Please step away from the shredder and ask your colleague to stop packing those boxes. The man, who appeared to be in his 50s with gray hair and expensive clothes, straightened up slowly. I'm Robert Harrison. This is my business, and I demand to know what this is about. Chen's voice came from behind them. Sergeant Chen, Metropolitan Police. The back exit is secured. Morrison was relieved to have backup in place. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, you're both under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit offenses under the Official Secrets Act. Victoria Harrison's composed facade cracked. This is ridiculous. We run a legitimate consulting business. Then, you won't mind explaining your relationship with Marcus Webb and the surveillance equipment he was carrying yesterday, Chen replied. The Harrisons exchanged glances, clearly trying to decide how much they should say. Morrison noticed that the paper shredder was still running, destroying what could be vital evidence. Turn off the shredder, please, he instructed Victoria Harrison. She hesitated, then reluctantly switched off the machine. Morrison looked at the bin full of shredded documents and realized they had probably lost important information about the operation. What were you shredding? Chen asked. Just routine business documents, Robert Harrison replied. Client confidentiality requirements, you understand. Morrison didn't believe that for a moment. We'll need to examine your computer systems and any remaining documents. Absolutely not, Victoria Harrison said firmly. Our clients have a right to privacy. Chen had been examining the boxes that Robert Harrison had been packing. Inspector, you need to see this. Inside the boxes were electronic devices similar to those found in Webb's briefcase. There were also maps of London showing various government buildings and detailed photographs of security installations. This looks like the same type of surveillance equipment Webb was carrying, Chen observed. Morrison studied the maps more closely. Red marks indicated specific locations around Westminster, including several that hadn't been mentioned in the previous day's investigation. "How many of these devices did you distribute?" he asked the Harrisons. Both remained silent, but their expressions suggested they were beginning to realize the seriousness of their situation. Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Inspector Morrison, this is Superintendent Hayes. We need you back at Scotland Yard immediately. The situation has developed significantly. Can you give me details over the radio?" "Negative. This needs to be discussed in person. Bring the Harrisons with you." An hour later, they were back at Scotland Yard in the same secure briefing room they had used that morning. Commander Blackwood was there, along with several additional officials Morrison didn't recognize. "Inspector," Blackwood began, "the analysis of the surveillance devices has revealed something extremely concerning. The data they transmitted wasn't just being collected for intelligence purposes." He activated a large display screen showing technical diagrams and data flows. The devices were designed to do more than just listen to communications. They were also capable of injecting false information into certain types of electronic systems. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of false information? Emergency alerts, security warnings, even false evacuation orders. If someone had gained access to the right systems, they could have created chaos throughout the government district. Chen looked up from her notes. So this wasn't just about gathering intelligence. It was about the capability to disrupt government operations. Exactly. And based on the timing of when these devices were placed, we believe the operation was building towards something specific. One of the new officials stepped forward. "I'm Director Sarah Collins from the National Cybersecurity Center. We've been analyzing the communication patterns from these devices, and they show preparation for a coordinated attack." Morrison realized they were dealing with something far more serious than fraud or even espionage. "What kind of attack?" "We're not entirely sure yet, but the pattern suggests it was timed to coincide with a major royal family event, something that would maximize public attention and governmental disruption." Blackwood pulled up a calendar on the screen. "Next week, there's a state visit by the President of France. The security arrangements involve coordination between multiple agencies and require precise timing. If someone could disrupt communications during that event," Collins continued, "they could create serious security vulnerabilities or even public panic." Morrison looked through the glass partition at Victoria and Robert Harrison, who were being held in separate interview rooms. "Do the Harrisons know about this larger plan?" "That's what we need to find out. Based on what you found in their office, they were clearly more than just Webb's local contacts." Chen had been studying the electronic devices found in the Harrisons' office. "These are more sophisticated than what Webb was carrying. They look like they could actually control some types of electronic systems, not just monitor them." Collins nodded grimly. "That's our assessment as well. If these had been successfully deployed, someone could have gained significant control over emergency communications throughout central London." Morrison began to understand the full scope of what Sarah Mitchell's quick thinking had prevented. The confrontation at the palace gates wasn't just about one man trying to gain unauthorized access. It was about stopping a sophisticated operation that could have compromised national security during a major international event. "Has Webb said anything about the timing of their operation?" Morrison asked. Blackwood shook his head. "He's still not talking. But the evidence suggests everything was planned to culminate next week during the state visit." "What about the devices that were already planted? Are they still functional?" "We've disabled the ones we found, but we're concerned there might be others we haven't located yet," Collins replied. Morrison realized they were in a race against time. If there were additional devices already in place, and if the Harrisons didn't cooperate, they might not be able to ensure security for the state visit. "We need to interview the Harrisons separately," he decided. "Maybe one of them will be willing to give us information about the broader operation." Chen agreed. "I'll take Victoria Harrison." She seemed more nervous than her husband. They spent the next several hours in detailed interviews, but both Harrisons proved to be well-trained in resisting interrogation. They admitted to knowing Webb, but claimed their relationship was purely business-related. Victoria Harrison insisted that Meridian Consulting was a legitimate firm that helped international clients navigate British business regulations. She claimed the surveillance equipment was for corporate security purposes. Robert Harrison maintained that they had no knowledge of any plan to disrupt government operations or compromise royal family security. But Morrison noticed inconsistencies in their stories. Victoria claimed not to know about the electronic devices, but her husband referred to them as if they were a normal part of their business. During a break in the interviews, Chin pulled Morrison aside. "I think Victoria knows more than she's saying. When I mentioned the state visit, she looked genuinely surprised. You think she didn't know about the timing? Maybe not the full scope. She might have thought they were just gathering intelligence, not planning active disruption." Morrison decided to try a different approach. When he returned to Victoria Harrison's interview room, he laid out photographs of the surveillance devices found at various government locations. "Mrs. Harrison, these devices were capable of more than just monitoring communications. They could have been used to create false emergency alerts during next week's state visit." Victoria Harrison's face went pale. "State visit? What are you talking about?" Morrison watched her reaction carefully. "The French president's visit. Didn't Webb discuss the timing with you?" Marcus said this was about commercial intelligence gathering. He never mentioned anything about disrupting government events. Morrison sensed he was getting somewhere. "What exactly did Webb tell you the operation was for?" Victoria Harrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with what to say. Finally, she spoke quietly. "He said they needed to gather information about British government security procedures for clients who were concerned about protecting their own facilities." "Who were these clients?" "I don't know. Marcus handled all the client relationships. We were just supposed to provide technical support and local knowledge." Morrison pressed further. "What kind of technical support?" "Analyzing building layouts, identifying security weak points, mapping communication systems." Robert has a background in electronic engineering. Chun, who had been observing through the one-way mirror, entered the room. "Mrs. Harrison, if you've been deceived about the true purpose of this operation, cooperation with our investigation could be taken into account." Victoria Harrison looked between the two detectives. "You really think they were planning to disrupt the state visit?" "The evidence strongly suggests that," Morrison replied. "The devices were positioned to maximum effect during a high-security event, and they were capable of creating serious communication problems." "Oh my God," Victoria Harrison whispered. "We thought we were just helping with security consulting." Morrison realized they had made a breakthrough. Victoria Harrison was genuinely shocked by the implications of what she had been involved in. "Mrs. Harrison, we need to know everything about Webb's contacts and the full scope of this operation. If there are additional devices we haven't found, people could be in danger." She nodded slowly. "I'll tell you everything I know. But I think Marcus was working with people we never met." Over the next hour, Victoria Harrison provided crucial information about the operation. She revealed that Webb had been planning the operation for months, gradually recruiting the Harrisons by offering them lucrative contracts for what seemed like legitimate security consulting work. She also provided information about meetings Webb had attended with unidentified individuals, including one at a hotel near Heathrow Airport just a week before his arrest. "There were at least 2 other people involved," she explained. "Marcus called them his overseas clients, but he never told us their names or where they were from." Morrison and Chun exchanged glances. This suggested that Webb's operation might have had international connections, possibly involving foreign intelligence services. "Did you ever see these overseas clients?" Chun asked. "Only once, from a distance. Marcus met them at the hotel, and Robert and I were supposed to deliver some equipment. We saw them in the lobby, but we weren't introduced." "Can you describe them?" 2 men, both middle-aged. One was tall with dark hair, the other was shorter and stockier. They looked European, but they could have been from anywhere. Morrison made notes about the description. "What kind of equipment did you deliver?" "Communication devices, and what Marcus said were specialized computers for data analysis." Chin showed Victoria Harrison photographs of the electronic equipment found in Webb's briefcase. "Did the equipment look like any of these items?" Victoria studied the photos carefully. "Yes, some of it was similar. But what we delivered was larger and more complex." Morrison realized they might be dealing with equipment they hadn't found yet. "Where did this meeting take place?" "The Marriott Hotel near Heathrow. Marcus said his clients were leaving the country the next day." Chin was already on her phone, contacting hotel security to request surveillance footage from the meeting. As the interview continued, Morrison began to piece together a picture of an operation that was much larger and more sophisticated than they had initially realized. Webb hadn't been working alone, or just with the Harrisons. There was an international network involved, and they had been planning something that could have had serious consequences for British national security. The phone in the interview room rang. It was Commander Blackwood with urgent news. "Inspector, we've found 2 more surveillance devices based on information from Mrs. Harrison. Both were hidden near critical communication relay points that handle emergency services coordination." Morrison felt a mix of relief and concern. "Are they disabled?" "Yes, but the analysis shows they were scheduled to activate automatically in 3 days, exactly when the French president arrives in London." Morrison looked at Victoria Harrison, who had gone even paler. "Mrs. Harrison, this information you've provided may have prevented a serious security incident. But we need to know if there's anything else, any other people Webb was working with, any other equipment, any other plans." Victoria shook her head slowly. "I've told you everything I know. I swear I had no idea it was anything like this." As the interview concluded, Morrison reflected on how a routine police patrol had uncovered an international operation that could have compromised the security of both the British government and visiting foreign dignitaries. Detective Sarah Mitchell's quick thinking at the palace gates had been the first domino to fall, leading to the discovery and disruption of a sophisticated threat. The confrontation with Royal Guard Thompson had seemed routine, but it had prevented what could have been a significant intelligence disaster. The investigation would continue as they worked to identify Webb's overseas contacts and ensure that all surveillance devices had been found and disabled. But, for now, the immediate threat had been neutralized, and the state visit could proceed safely. Morrison knew that this case would be studied for years as an example of how seemingly small incidents could reveal much larger threats. The partnership between police officers, royal guards, and intelligence services had proven crucial in protecting national security. As he prepared his final report, Morrison made sure to highlight the professionalism and instincts of everyone involved, from Detective Sarah Mitchell to Royal Guard Thompson to the technical specialists who had analyzed the surveillance equipment. The royal family could sleep safely, the state visit would proceed without incident, and the public would never know how close they had come to a serious security breach. It was, Morrison reflected, exactly how these cases should end, with the threat neutralized and normal life continuing undisturbed. The only evidence of the drama would be the files locked away in Scotland Yard's secure archives, and the satisfied knowledge of the law enforcement professionals who had worked together to keep the nation safe. Detective Inspector James Morrison arrived at Scotland Yard at 7:30 a.m. the next morning to find his desk covered with reports about the Marcus Webb arrest. The case had escalated overnight from a simple fraud investigation to a matter of national security. The contents of Webb's briefcase had revealed a sophisticated operation that went far beyond one man trying to access the palace. Morrison had 25 years of experience with the Metropolitan Police, including 15 years working on cases involving threats to the royal family. He had seen everything from delusional individuals who believed they had special relationships with royalty to organized groups planning serious attacks. But the Webb case felt different. He picked up the forensic report on the electronic equipment found in Webb's briefcase. The devices were high-tech surveillance tools, some of which were not available to ordinary citizens. The report noted that several pieces appeared to be modified versions of equipment used by intelligence agencies. "Morning, Inspector," Detective Sergeant Lisa Chun said as she entered the office. Chun was Morrison's partner, a brilliant investigator who specialized in cybercrimes and electronic surveillance. "I've been up most of the night going through Webb's equipment." "What did you find?" "More than we expected," Chun replied, setting down a thick folder. The surveillance devices in his briefcase weren't just for gathering information. Some of them were designed to intercept secure communications. Morrison looked up from the forensic report. "You mean they could have been used to eavesdrop on royal family communications?" "Exactly. If Webb had managed to plant these devices in the palace, they could have accessed encrypted phone calls, secure internet traffic, even internal security communications." "What about the maps and floor plans?" "Those are the really concerning part," Chin said, opening her laptop. The palace plans Webb had were incredibly detailed. They showed not just the public areas that tourists see, but private residential quarters, security checkpoints, and emergency evacuation routes. Morrison felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. How would someone outside the security services get that kind of information? That's what we need to find out. Either Webb had help from someone with legitimate access, or there's a serious security leak somewhere. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Superintendent Patricia Hayes entered, followed by a man in an expensive suit whom Morrison didn't recognize. "Morrison, Chun, I need you to meet Commander David Blackwood from the Security Service," Hayes said. The Security Service was the official name for MI5, Britain's domestic intelligence agency. Blackwood was a tall, serious-looking man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. He looked like someone who had spent his career dealing with threats to national security. "The Webb case has attracted attention at the highest levels," Blackwood said without preamble. "The Prime Minister has been briefed, and the palace is understandably concerned about the security implications." "What can you tell us about Webb's background?" Morrison asked. "That's part of the problem," Blackwood replied. "We're finding that much of what we thought we knew about Marcus Webb appears to be fabricated. The identity theft ring Sergeant Davies mentioned yesterday seems to be much more sophisticated than ordinary criminal activity." Chin leaned forward. "Are we talking about foreign intelligence involvement?" "We can't rule it out. The equipment Webb was carrying suggests access to resources beyond typical criminal organizations. We need to find out who his contacts are and how extensive this operation might be." Superintendent Hayes spread several photographs across the desk. "These are surveillance photos from around the palace over the past few weeks. We're reviewing all the footage to see if Webb had been conducting reconnaissance before yesterday's incident." Morrison studied the photos. They showed various people near the palace gates, some taking pictures, others just walking past. In a city like London with millions of tourists, identifying suspicious behavior was like finding a needle in a haystack. "There," Chen pointed to a photo taken 3 days earlier. "That's definitely Webb, but he looks different." In the photo, Webb was wearing casual clothes and had a beard. He was standing near the palace gates with what appeared to be a tourist guidebook, blending in perfectly with the crowds. "He's been planning this for a while," Morrison observed. "The question is whether he was planning to gather intelligence or actually plant surveillance devices." Blackwood nodded grimly. "Based on the equipment we found, probably both. If he had succeeded in accessing restricted areas, he could have gathered detailed intelligence about security procedures and planted devices for long-term surveillance." "What about the woman he met with yesterday?" Chen asked. "Have we identified her?" "Not yet," Hayes replied. "We're reviewing security footage from the building where they met, and we've identified the businesses located there. One of them is a private investigation firm with some questionable clients." Morrison made a note to follow up on that lead. "Has Webb said anything during questioning?" "He's not talking," Blackwood said. "He has an expensive lawyer who appeared very quickly after his arrest. But we're hoping the evidence will tell us what we need to know." Chen opened her laptop and pulled up a map of central London. "I've been analyzing the locations where Webb was spotted yesterday. There's a pattern that suggests he was conducting a final reconnaissance before attempting to execute his plan." The map showed red dots marking Webb's movements throughout the day. Starting from his first appearance at the palace, the dots traced a route through several government buildings and security checkpoints. "Look at this," Chen continued. "After he left the palace the first time, he didn't just wander randomly. He visited specific locations near other sensitive government facilities. The Foreign Office, the Treasury, and the Cabinet Office," Morrison noted. "All within walking distance of Buckingham Palace." Blackwood studied the map carefully. "This supports our theory that Webb was part of a larger intelligence-gathering operation. He wasn't just interested in the royal family. He was mapping government security infrastructure." Superintendent Hayes received a call on her secure phone. After a brief conversation, she turned to the group with a concerned expression. "That was the Palace Security Office. They found something during their sweep of the areas where Webb was taking photographs yesterday." "What kind of something?" Morrison asked. "A small electronic device attached to the underside of a security camera housing. It had been there for several days, possibly weeks." Chen immediately opened her laptop and began typing rapidly. "If they found one device, there might be others. We need to expand the search area." Blackwood was already on his phone, speaking in urgent tones to someone at MI5 headquarters. When he finished the call, his expression was even more serious than before. We're initiating a full security review of all government facilities in central London. If Webb managed to plant surveillance devices before yesterday's arrest attempt, we need to find them quickly. Morrison felt the weight of the investigation settling on his shoulders. What had started as a confrontation between a police officer and a suspicious individual at the palace gates was revealing itself to be a sophisticated intelligence operation that could have compromised national security. Inspector Morrison, Blackwood said, I need you and Sergeant Chun to focus on Webb's associates. The woman he met with yesterday is our best lead to understanding how large this operation might be. What about Webb himself? We'll continue working on him, but professional operatives are trained to resist interrogation. His contacts and the evidence trail will probably tell us more than he will. Chun had been studying the building records for the office where Webb met the mysterious woman. I've identified the businesses in that building. There are 6 different companies, including an accounting firm, a travel agency, and something called Meridian Consulting Services. What does Meridian Consulting do? Morrison asked. That's the interesting part. They describe themselves as international business advisors, but I can't find any details about their actual clients or services. Morrison and Chun exchanged glances. In their experience, companies with vague descriptions often had something to hide. We need to pay Meridian Consulting a visit, Morrison said. An hour later, Morrison and Chun were standing outside the office building where Webb had met the unidentified woman. The building was typical of many small commercial properties in London, old but well-maintained, housing a variety of small businesses. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor where Meridian Consulting had their offices. The door was unmarked except for a small brass nameplate. Through the frosted glass, they could see the outline of furniture, but no movement. Morrison knocked on the door. After a moment, it was opened by a receptionist who looked nervous. Can I help you? Metropolitan Police, Morrison said, showing his identification. We'd like to speak with someone about yesterday's visit from Marcus Webb. The receptionist's face went pale. I don't know anyone by that name. Perhaps you could check with your supervisor, Chun suggested politely, but firmly. I'm sorry, but Mr. Harrison isn't available today. Morrison noticed that the receptionist hadn't claimed not to know Webb until after they had mentioned his name. That suggested she did know who he was. When will Mr. Harrison be available? Chun asked. I'm not sure. He's been called away on urgent business. Morrison looked around the small reception area. Despite being described as business consultants, there were no promotional materials, client testimonials, or any other signs of a normal consulting business. Could you give us Mr. Harrison's contact information? We'll call him directly. I'm sorry, but I can't give out personal information about our staff. Chun smiled pleasantly. Of course. Perhaps you could ask him to contact us when he returns. Here's my card. As they left the building, Morrison was convinced that Meridian Consulting was connected to Webb's operation. The receptionist's nervous behavior and Harrison's convenient absence were classic signs of people trying to avoid police attention. What do you think? Chun asked as they walked back to their car. I think we need to dig deeper into Meridian Consulting's background. And I think we need to put surveillance on this building in case Harrison or our mysterious woman shows up. Chun was already on her phone arranging for a surveillance team. I'll also start researching the company's registration records and financial background. Their radio crackled to life. Inspector Morrison, this is Control. You're needed back at Scotland Yard immediately. Priority 1. Morrison felt his pulse quicken. Priority 1 meant an urgent security matter requiring immediate attention. When they arrived back at Scotland Yard, they found Blackwood waiting for them with several other officials Morrison didn't recognize. We've had a breakthrough, Blackwood announced. The electronic device found at the palace has been analyzed, and it reveals some very concerning capabilities. He led them to a secure briefing room where technical experts had set up displays showing the device and its components. This isn't just a simple listening device, one of the technicians explained. It's a sophisticated piece of equipment capable of intercepting multiple types of communications simultaneously. Morrison studied the images on the screen. The device was smaller than a mobile phone but contained complex circuitry and multiple antennas. How long could something like this operate undetected? Chun asked. Potentially for months. It has its own power source and can transmit data to remote locations without being connected to any palace systems. Blackwood pointed to a map showing the device's location relative to key palace buildings. Based on where this was placed, it could have intercepted security radio communications, mobile phone calls from palace staff, and possibly even encrypted government communications that passed through this area. Morrison realized the implications. So if Webb had succeeded in planting additional devices, they could have compromised communications throughout the government district. Exactly. And given the sophistication of this equipment, we're now treating this as a potential national security incident rather than simple criminal activity. One of the officials Morrison hadn't recognized stepped forward. He was introduced as Deputy Director Williams from the Cabinet Office, which coordinated security for the entire government. Inspector Morrison, your quick action yesterday may have prevented a significant intelligence breach, but we need to ensure that this operation hasn't already compromised other facilities. Williams spread out a series of aerial photographs showing central London. Red circles marked the locations of major government buildings and security installations. We're conducting security sweeps at all of these facilities. So far, we've found 2 additional devices similar to the one discovered at the palace. Chen looked up from her notes. Where were they found? One near the Foreign Office and another close to the Treasury building. Both had been in place for several weeks. Morrison felt a chill as he realized the scope of what they were dealing with. So Webb's operation was already partially successful. Unfortunately, yes. We're analyzing the data these devices may have transmitted to determine what information might have been compromised. Blackwood pulled up additional surveillance photos. We're also reviewing months of security footage to identify anyone who might have planted these devices. Webb couldn't have done this alone. The investigation was becoming more complex by the hour. What had started as Detective Sarah Mitchell's instinctive response to suspicious behavior was revealing a sophisticated intelligence operation that threatened the security of the highest levels of British government. Morrison looked around the room at the serious faces of the security officials. He realized that the confrontation between a police officer and a royal guard the previous morning had been just the tip of a very dangerous iceberg. Inspector, Blackwood said, we need you to focus on finding Webb's associates. The woman he met with yesterday is now our highest priority. She may be the key to understanding how deep this operation goes, and whether there are additional threats we haven't discovered yet. Morrison nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that had fallen on his team. The safety of the royal family and the security of the British government might depend on their ability to unravel Webb's network before any additional damage could be done. As they prepared to leave the briefing room, Chen received a call that made her expression suddenly alert. Inspector, she said after hanging up. Our surveillance team at the Meridian Consulting building reports that someone just entered the office using a back entrance. It's a woman matching the description of Webb's contact. Morrison felt a surge of adrenaline. Looks like we might get some answers sooner than expected. Within minutes, they were racing through London traffic toward what could be their first real break in understanding the full scope of Marcus Webb's operation. The investigation was about to take another dramatic turn. Detective Sarah Mitchell had been walking her beat in central London for 12 years. She knew every corner, every shop owner, and every regular face that passed through the busy streets near Buckingham Palace. The morning started like any other Tuesday in September. Tourists filled the sidewalks, cameras clicking constantly as they tried to capture the perfect shot of the famous palace gates. Sarah checked her watch. It was 10:30 a.m., and the changing of the guard ceremony was still 2 hours away. She noticed the crowd was already building up along the barriers. Street vendors called out their prices for postcards and miniature Union Jack flags. The smell of roasted chestnuts mixed with car exhaust filled the air. As she walked past the main entrance, something caught her attention. A man in his 30s was arguing loudly with one of the Queen's guards. The guard stood perfectly still in his red tunic and tall black hat, his face showing no emotion. But the man was getting increasingly angry. I said move, the man shouted, his face red with anger. I need to get through there. Sarah quickened her pace. She had seen plenty of tourists try to get reactions from the guards, but this seemed different. The man was well-dressed in an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. He didn't look like a typical tourist trying to make the guard laugh or break character. Sir, You need to step back from the guard, Sarah called out as she approached. Her voice was calm, but firm. She had learned long ago that staying cool was the key to handling tense situations. The man turned toward her, his eyes flashing with irritation. This has nothing to do with you, officer. This is official business. Sarah looked at the man more carefully. He was about 6 feet tall with dark hair slicked back. His suit looked expensive, probably costing more than she made in a month. The leather briefcase in his hand had gold clasps and looked brand new. What kind of official business? She asked, stepping closer but keeping her hands relaxed at her sides. I'm Marcus Webb, senior advisor to the Home Secretary, the man said, pulling out a wallet and flashing an identification card. I have urgent documents that need to be delivered immediately. Sarah glanced at the ID. It looked official enough, but something felt wrong. The guard, whose name tag read Thompson, remained completely still. His training was clear. No matter what happened around him, he was to maintain his post and bearing. Mr. Webb, Sarah said politely, if you have official business with the palace, you need to go through the proper channels. There's a visitor's entrance around the corner where they handle all official deliveries. I don't have time for that bureaucratic nonsense. Webb snapped. These documents are time-sensitive. Every minute matters. The crowd of tourists had started to notice the commotion. Some were taking pictures with their phones, while others whispered among themselves. Sarah was aware that whatever happened next would likely end up on social media within minutes. Sir, I understand your urgency, Sarah said. But the guard cannot help you. He's not allowed to break protocol, no matter who you are or what you're carrying. Webb's face grew redder. He stepped closer to the guard, who remained motionless. Listen here, soldier. I'm giving you a direct order to step aside. That's when Sarah knew something was seriously wrong. A real government official would know that the Queen's Guard doesn't take orders from civilians, no matter how important they think they are. The guards answer only to their commanding officers and follow very specific protocols. Mr. Webb, I'm going to have to ask you to step back now, Sarah said, her tone becoming more authoritative. She moved between Webb and the guard. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Webb said, his voice getting louder. I could have your job for this. Do you know what kind of trouble you're causing? Sarah had heard similar threats countless times during her career. Politicians, wealthy businessmen, and self-important officials often tried to use their perceived power to get special treatment. But she had learned to see through the bluster. Sir, threats against a police officer are a serious matter, she said calmly. I'm asking you one more time to step back and use the proper entrance. Webb looked around at the growing crowd of onlookers. More tourists had gathered, and some were clearly recording the incident. A few local office workers had stopped on their lunch break to watch the drama unfold. Fine, Webb said through gritted teeth. But this isn't over. You'll be hearing from my office about this obstruction of official business. He turned and walked away, but Sarah noticed he headed in the opposite direction from the visitor's entrance. That confirmed her suspicions that something wasn't right about his story. Guard Thompson finally allowed himself a small glance at Sarah. Though his face remained expressionless, she thought she saw a hint of gratitude in his eyes. He had been in an impossible position, unable to respond to Webb's demands, but also unable to call for help without breaking protocol. Sarah decided to follow Webb at a distance. Her instincts told her that this wasn't just a case of an impatient government official. Something about his behavior and his reaction to being refused didn't add up. Webb walked quickly through the crowds, constantly looking over his shoulder. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in hushed tones. Sarah couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested he was upset about something going wrong. As they moved away from the palace, Webb ducked into a small coffee shop. Sarah positioned herself across the street where she could keep an eye on him through the window. She called her supervisor, Sergeant Davies, to report the incident. Davies here, came the familiar gruff voice. Sarge, it's Mitchell. I just had a strange encounter at the palace. A man claiming to be a government advisor was demanding that a Queen's Guard break protocol to let him through. Sounds like another tourist with too much ego and not enough sense, Davies replied. That's what I thought at first, but something doesn't feel right. He had what looked like official ID, but his behavior was off. Real government officials know how security works around here. Where is he now? I'm watching him from across the street. He's in Murphy's coffee shop on Victoria Street. And He looks nervous about something. Stay with him, but keep your distance. I'll run his name through the system and see what comes up. What did he say his name was? Marcus Webb, claimed to be a senior advisor to the Home Secretary. Got it. I'll get back to you in a few minutes. Sarah continued watching Webb through the coffee shop window. He was sitting at a corner table, his briefcase open in front of him. She could see him looking through papers, but from this distance, she couldn't make out any details. Her radio crackled to life. Mitchell, this is Davies. We have a problem. What kind of problem? I checked with the Home Office. They have no record of a Marcus Webb as a senior advisor. In fact, they've never heard of him. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. So the ID was fake? Looking that way, there's more. I ran his description through our database. We have a Marcus Webb who matches your description. He's wanted for questioning in connection with several fraud cases involving government impersonation. Should I arrest him? Not yet. We need more evidence than a fake ID. Keep watching him and see what he does next. I'm sending backup to your location. Officers Jenkins and Patel are about 5 minutes away. Sarah acknowledged and continued her surveillance. Inside the coffee shop, Webb seemed to be getting more agitated. He kept checking his phone and looking around nervously. Whatever he had planned wasn't going according to schedule. About 10 minutes later, Webb suddenly closed his briefcase and stood up quickly. He left money on the table and headed for the door. Sarah pressed herself back against the building wall as he emerged onto the street. Webb looked around carefully before turning left and walking quickly toward Westminster Abbey. Sarah followed, staying about 50 yards behind and using the crowds of tourists as cover. Her radio buzzed quietly. Mitchell, this is Jenkins. We're in position near the Abbey. Where's your suspect? He's heading your way on Victoria Street. Dark suit, leather briefcase, about 6 feet tall. Got him in sight. What's the plan? Just observation for now. Let's see where he goes and what he does. Webb walked past Westminster Abbey and turned down a smaller side street. This area had fewer tourists and more office buildings. Sarah had to be more careful to avoid being spotted. Webb stopped in front of a small office building and looked around nervously before going inside. Sarah noted the address and called it in to Davies. The building houses several small businesses. Davies reported back after checking the records. Accounting firms, a travel agency, and a few other offices. Nothing that would require urgent government documents. Maybe he's meeting someone, Sarah suggested. Could be. Stay in position and see if anyone comes out with him. Sarah found a spot across the street where she could watch the building entrance. Jenkins and Patel had positioned themselves at either end of the street to cover all possible exits. After about 20 minutes, Webb emerged from the building, but he wasn't alone. A woman in her 40s walked beside him. She was well-dressed in a business suit and carried a small handbag. They appeared to be having an intense conversation. The woman seemed upset about something. She kept shaking her head and gesturing with her hands. Webb was trying to calm her down, but it wasn't working. We've got a second person, Sarah reported over her radio. Middle-aged woman, business attire. They appear to be arguing about something. Can you hear what they're saying? Negative. Too far away, and there's too much street noise. Webb and the woman walked to the corner and stood talking for several more minutes. Then, the woman suddenly turned and walked away quickly in the opposite direction. Webb looked frustrated and angry. He pulled out his phone and made another call. This time he was clearly agitated, gesturing wildly as he spoke. The call lasted about 2 minutes before he hung up and started walking back toward the palace area. He's on the move again, Sarah reported, heading back toward Buckingham Palace. This is getting interesting, Jenkins replied. What do you think he's up to? I'm not sure, but whatever it is, it involves that briefcase and probably requires access to the palace grounds. As they followed Webb back through the busy streets, Sarah tried to piece together what she had observed. A man with a fake government ID tries to gain unauthorized access to the palace. When that fails, he meets with a mysterious woman who seems upset about something. Now he's heading back to the palace. Her radio crackled again. Mitchell, this is Davies. I've been doing more digging on our Mr. Webb. It gets worse. How much worse? He's suspected of being involved in a major identity theft ring. They create fake government credentials and use them to gain access to secure facilities. Once inside, They steal valuable information or plant surveillance devices. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. So this could be about more than just fraud. Exactly. The security implications are serious. I'm contacting Palace Security to brief them on the situation. Webb had reached the area around Buckingham Palace again. But instead of approaching the main entrance where he had been turned away earlier, he walked around to a side street that ran along the palace walls. Sarah followed carefully, staying well back. This area was less crowded with tourists, which made surveillance more difficult. She had to rely on doorways and parked cars for cover. Webb stopped about halfway down the street and looked around carefully. He seemed to be studying the wall and the security cameras mounted on poles. After a few minutes, he pulled out his phone and appeared to be taking pictures. He's photographing security installations, Sarah whispered into her radio. This definitely isn't about delivering documents. Palace Security is on alert, Davies confirmed. They want to know his exact location. Side street running parallel to the palace, about 200 meters from the northwest corner. He's taking pictures of cameras and the wall structure. Within minutes, Sarah saw two plainclothes security officers moving casually down the street from the opposite direction. They looked like ordinary pedestrians, but she recognized the way they moved and communicated with subtle hand signals. Webb seemed oblivious to their approach. He was focused on his phone, probably reviewing the pictures he had taken. When the security officers were about 20 feet away, he finally looked up and seemed to realize something was wrong. He quickly put his phone away and started walking briskly toward the main road. But the security officers were ready for this. One moved to block his path, while the other approached from behind. "Excuse me, sir," the first officer said politely. "Could we have a word with you?" Webb tried to push past them. "I'm late for an appointment. I don't have time." "I'm afraid we'll have to insist," the second officer said, showing his credentials. "Palace Security. We'd like to ask you a few questions." That's when Webb made his biggest mistake. Instead of trying to talk his way out of the situation, he dropped his briefcase and ran. The briefcase hit the pavement and popped open, spilling papers and electronic devices across the sidewalk. Sarah could see what looked like surveillance equipment, fake identification documents, and detailed maps of the palace grounds. "He's running," she called into her radio as she joined the chase. "And we've got evidence scattered all over the street." Webb was fast, but he was running in an expensive suit and dress shoes on London's uneven sidewalks. The security officers and police were better prepared for a foot chase. Jenkins appeared from a side street and tackled Webb to the ground just as he tried to turn the corner. The arrest was swift and efficient. As Webb was handcuffed, Sarah looked back at the scattered contents of his briefcase. What she saw made her realize they had prevented something much more serious than simple fraud. Among the papers were detailed floor plans of Buckingham Palace, photos of security personnel, and what appeared to be schedules of royal family movements. There were also several pieces of sophisticated electronic equipment that looked like they could be used for surveillance or communication interception. "Good work, Mitchell," Sergeant Davies said as he arrived on the scene. "Your instincts about this guy were spot on. What do you think he was really planning? We'll find out during interrogation. But based on what's in that briefcase, this was probably about much more than taking a few photos." As Webb was led away in handcuffs, Sarah thought about how the day had started with what seemed like a simple case of tourist misbehavior. If she hadn't trusted her instincts about something being wrong, Webb might have succeeded in whatever he had been planning. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger as word of the arrest spread. Many people were taking photos and videos of the scene. Sarah knew that by evening, this incident would be all over social media and probably in the news. "One more thing," Davies said as they watched the evidence being collected. "Palace Security wants to commend you and the guard who kept his post. If Webb had managed to get past that checkpoint, he might have gained access to areas where he could have done real damage." Sarah nodded, thinking about Guard Thompson, who had remained perfectly still and professional throughout the entire confrontation. His refusal to break protocol, even when pressured by someone with apparent authority, had been the first line of defense against what could have been a serious security breach. As the street returned to normal and the tourists went back to their sightseeing, Sarah realized that this case was probably just beginning. Webb's arrest would likely lead to investigations into his associates, including the woman he had met with. The identity theft ring Davies had mentioned was probably much larger than just one man with a fake ID. But, for now, the immediate threat had been neutralized, and the royal family's security remained intact. It had been a good day's work, even if it had started with something that seemed routine. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the palace walls as Sarah resumed her patrol. She made a mental note to check in with Guard Thompson later to see if he was okay after the morning's incident. Despite their training to remain impassive, the guards were still human beings who could be affected by threatening situations. As she walked past the main entrance again, everything looked peaceful. Tourists continued taking pictures, street vendors continued selling souvenirs, and the Queen's Guard stood at their posts with the same dignity and professionalism they had maintained for centuries. But Sarah now had a deeper appreciation for the complex security challenges that existed beneath the surface of this seemingly tranquil tourist destination. The arrest of Marcus Webb had revealed how sophisticated threats against the royal family could be, and how important it was for everyone, from police officers to palace guards, to remain vigilant and trust their instincts when something didn't seem right.